I was born in the 1970s, so I spent about half of my life without any internet or cell phone. Both have caused a noticeable change in the populace, and it's a change that concerns me. You see, when I was young, most of our information about current events came from the news, which was limited to very few outlets and time slots, so it represented a tiny fraction of our lives. The news usually led with things like war, crime, natural disasters, etc., and then it moved on to less provocative things like sports and weather. This principle had a slogan: if it bleeds, it leads. This takes advantage of human nature. You will have an easier time capturing people's attention with strife and trouble because people are naturally motivated by self preservation. This is why it's easier for us to remember negative things than positive things. It's simply the way we evolved to avoid danger. Those of us who successfully avoided danger ended up surviving and procreating. Stories that exploit that aspect of human nature get higher ratings. This is one of the main reasons I've been so critical of religion. You see, religion also uses fear, strife, and negativity to perpetuate itself. No, not all the time, and no, not all religious people. But oftentimes, it invents problems or points to real problems, claims that it's further evidence our doom is imminent, and then blames specific groups of people. Then those unfortunate groups, be they gay people, non believers, other religions, etc., are on the receiving end of unjustified wrath and bigotry. It also benefits the attacking religion. Sell people the idea that catastrophe and destruction will come very soon, within their lifetime, and the only proper way to react is to adopt the religion. That has been very successful for thousands of years, despite the fact that the world did not end. The claim never seems to be held accountable for its failure. Unfortunately, the tactics of religion spread beyond religion. Others will come to discover that they too would not have to worry about being held accountable for their false claims. The internet, more specifically social media, unwittingly became a huge catalyst for this phenomenon. In the past, when people felt vulnerable and sought answers, they found religion, which was more than willing to lie to them. In the present, when people feel vulnerable and seek answers, they find fake news, and they find countless people online who are more than willing to lie to them. The early internet was largely a novelty. You could exchange emails, you could get a patch for a video game. If you had 8 minutes to spare without needing to use your phone, you could take that time to download a picture. At first, social media did not really exist. As MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter came onto the scene, it became easier for regular, everyday, average people to become celebrities. They posted things like animal videos, pranks, and skits. Very few of the popular ones were political. That was still the domain of the news. Then a few things changed. The change, I believe, was driven largely by two things: algorithms and monetization. This gave social media the same incentive structure as the news. That is to say, the social media companies were interested in the amount of time they could keep your eyes on the screen, and the users were interested in making as much money as possible. This was a perfect symbiosis. What the users quickly learned is that if it bleeds, it leads, is an excellent way to get people's attention and keep it. They also learned that the religious tactics of fear mongering and blame are tried and true methods to develop a following. If they were successful, then the algorithm was sure to promote them, thereby encouraging the tactic. So, what once only applied to the news in the form of catastrophe and to religion in the form of scapegoating now applied to literally Everyone. What was once relegated to a half hour of news per day and a Sunday of preaching turned into a 24/7 constant stream bombarding us from every direction. What sort of effect do you think this has on us? If you are what you think, then what becomes of you when all of your thoughts are negative and hate filled? Within a few years, we ended up with 1 million news anchor preachers all trying to sell you the idea that your world, your society, your country, your family, your very way of life, anything at all that you care about is on the brink of destruction by those people. Why? Because doom and gloom and strife gets eyes on the screen, and eyes on the screen mean money and influence. The social media companies benefit and the users benefit. Those benefits, however, come at a steep societal cost. It makes us more angry, anxious, and divided. And for that reason, the doom and gloom content of blame, division, and hatred could end up causing a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is not to say that bad things don't happen or that the health of our society does not fluctuate. Of course, these things happen. The end of the world is inevitable. Catastrophic events are inevitable. But bad events simply become fuel for the outrage cycle. They're actually very profitable to the influencers who usually have to bide their time between bad events. Such events aren't merely impartially reported, they're always an opportunity to assign blame and catastrophize. Any facts are drowned beneath a sea of opinions and lies. If there is no outrage, it will simply be invented, and sometimes certain people can be to blame, but beware when it's overzealously extrapolated onto entire demographics. Always beware of demographic salesmanship. Demographic salesmen are the people who try to sell you the idea that this race is better than that race, or this sex is better than that sex, or this generation is better than that generation, etc. These are fundamental aspects of people, not something that is a result of anything they've done, so there's no blame to assign. In trying to sell people the idea that others are lesser or blameworthy because of the way they were born, what becomes the solution? Discrimination? Genocide? We've seen such solutions before. Rather than save our society, as they claim, those are the types of solutions that have resulted in the actual destruction of society. My hope is that more people will push back against demographic salesmanship, make it so that such people have no incentive to do it. There are a few misconceptions that persist in the collective psyche of society that help perpetuate our vulnerability to such manipulation. The most prominent of these misconceptions is that the truth will always win. Unfortunately, the truth can be buried beneath a mountain of lies and stay buried forever. The best ideas don't always win. They don't necessarily sell themselves. In a debate, we value charisma over facts. If you give equal time to accurate science and social media, the masses can absolutely side with social media. Because lies spread faster than the truth, and anger is more influential than joy, what becomes of our social media as it descends into a contest of power and influence? It becomes a place where lies that make people angry become the most effective avenue for success. Because of lies told by our governments and biased or sensational reporting by the media, people lost trust in our institutions. Unfortunately, this meant that they turned to people who lie to them even more, like a lot of social media influencers. because they have just as much incentive to be dishonest, but with even less accountability than our institutions. This has actually caused people to listen to anonymous, incorrect influencers on TikTok and Twitter who have studied an issue for all of 15 minutes, if that, and put more faith in them than a correct scientist who has studied it for decades. This is not good. People have conflated contrarianism with truth and being anti-establishment with being correct. People have assumed that those who are small and independent are necessarily more trustworthy than anything large, funded, and organized. That is simply wrong. And I say this as a small independent social media content creator who mostly does critiques of organized religion, which makes me both contrarian and anti-establishment. But I don't want you to think that any of that is what makes me more trustworthy. I'd rather let my arguments and methods do that. You see, our incentive structures are now very similar to that of the establishment, but the influencers have the added incentive of direct engagement with their vanity and have a much easier time engaging in hoaxes than large groups of people. Brain imaging studies have shown that it makes us feel good to punish people. How much has that caused us to be more interested in expressing moral outrage than finding real solutions? We are seeing that manifest today as the culture wars of social media influence our government with political theater that doesn't actually solve anything. Unlike any other time in human history, average people now have a viable avenue to attain control, influence, and wealth through performative punditry. It's in their very name, the influencers. Now, I once thought that this would be a great way for average people to speak truth to power, because that's what I wanted to do. But after years of observing the results, I realize I was wrong, at least partially. It can be a way to speak truth to power, but it also became a way for average people to become every bit as corrupt as the power. Your duty is to recognize which is which, and that's not always easy. Some of us realize this. We know we are constantly being bombarded with lies and falsehoods from both institutions and individuals from every direction. So, it can be difficult to know what is true, what is false, what is reporting, and what is propaganda. This leaves us with a sense of hopelessness. Try to recognize the flaws of logic in the way things are presented to you, the attempts to manipulate your emotions. And don't assume something is true just because it is accompanied by a headline, picture, graph, or even video, all of which can be misleading or faked. Don't assume it's true just because it aligns with your preconceived notions, or that it's false because it doesn't. You must always consider sources and context. Part of avoiding deception is the ability to distinguish a statement of opinion from a statement of fact. There are many types of propaganda that are used to deceive and sell various ideologies online today. I came up with a list of 5 principles that have become some of the most common ways I've noticed people use to create propaganda. 1. They carefully curate anecdotes. 2. They remove context. 3. They poison the well with uncharitable interpretations. 4. They present the exceptions as the rule. And 5. They juxtapose the exceptions with their ideal. These principles are extremely effective with those who lack critical thinking skills. That's why it's just as important, if not more so, to learn how to think than what to think. Keeping these principles in mind have helped me spot deception countless times. Here's a popular example of propaganda that uses 4 out of 5 of these principles simultaneously. This meme has been circulated by many accounts on many platforms. In this example, we see the person using it as evidence of the destruction of Western civilization, a very common consequence people like to use to promote fear, blame, anger, and division. Perhaps he's being hyperbolic for comedic effect, but there are people who actually believe this. Careful curation of anecdotes is the one that doesn't really apply here, unless many such examples are used in succession to push a certain narrative. Careful to avoid any contrary examples, even if the contrary is more common. The context that was removed is that that photo on the right was a special campaign for Pride Month and is quite far from representing Calvin Klein's typical advertising in 2022. The uncharitable interpretation that usually accompanies this meme and others like it is that certain lifestyles are being promoted, thereby attacking quote unquote normal lifestyles, and people often link it to a Jewish cabal, sometimes synonymous with globalism or communism, Marxism, or postmodernism. It's actually the perfect opposite. The truth is that this is the result of research into untapped sources of revenue. This is a company. Their sole purpose is to make money. Now, I suspect that they don't actually care about social justice issues. Plus-sized people have money to spend. LGBT people and those who support them have money to spend. The company wants a part of it. It's simple consumerism. Furthermore, companies also learned that controversy saves them millions in advertising dollars because people tend to tune out ads that are bought and paid for, becoming like white noise. But they pay extra attention to ads that are being complained about in outrage posts online. So when you complain about an advertisement, you're actually doing exactly what they want you to do. They want people to know and to be thinking about their products. Their biggest concern is with getting the word out, and they're more than happy to let you do that for them, even if what you have to say about it is negative. The exceptions being presented as the rule here is evident when you look at most of the Calvin Klein ads of 2022, which still look comparable to the ads of 1992. The entire homepage of their website is nothing but typical slender models. In fact, you could take some funny-looking Calvin Klein ads of 1992 and compare them to the more common ones of 2022 and create the inverse of this meme to promote the idea that the past was strange and degenerate and that we are improving. And the way the exception is juxtaposed with their ideal in this meme is obvious, as it is the central premise of what they are doing. Also, consider that Kate Moss herself was only 17 years old in the ad on the left, and she said that the photo shoot made her feel physically sick and objectified. And that ad is what is being presented as the ideal before the degeneracy, before the fall from grace in the right-hand ad, just because it acknowledges that other types of people exist, people who may want to wear underwear. Nobody who sees this meme will analyze it the way I just did. They won't research it. The point of the meme will be made. It will be simple and powerful. The impression will imprint upon our minds, influence us, and then pop up anytime we see anything that corroborates this misleading imagery and reinforces our delusion. We are misled. Depending upon how much propaganda we have consumed, our perception of reality could be completely different from what it actually is, like living in our own personal matrix. If you have critical thinking skills, however, you would not even have to analyze this meme the way I just did. You would recognize it for what it is. And there are entire social media accounts, popular ones, completely devoted to this one specific form of propaganda, the simplistic, cherry-picked side-by-side comparison to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the infamous they are trying to destroy your way of life. And it works. An example of people carefully curating anecdotes would be this Twitter thread that includes 16 examples of people fainting. The vast majority of the replies blamed the vaccines, which was the exact intent of the person who posted them. Do we know if these people were vaccinated? No. Was fainting very common before the vaccines? Yes. In fact, if you do a YouTube search for fainting compilation, you will get thousands of examples of people fainting before the pandemic. Here's 18 entire compilations of people fainting that were uploaded before the pandemic. But a bunch of single examples curated together with a certain message make an impression on people, make them feel like it's a trend. They even say things like, "Never in all my life have I ever seen people pass out like that before." That's because you've never seen them carefully curated for you to sell you a narrative before. There could actually be far fewer people fainting now, but seeing is believing, and when people don't see the counterexamples, they get a false impression of reality. This also can take advantage of a phenomenon called frequency illusion, which simply means that when someone pays attention to something for the first time, they tend to notice it more often, and that can give the illusion that it is happening more often, when in fact it is not. When I replied with a compilation of people fainting before the pandemic, my replies were hidden by the original tweet author, and then they blocked me. This tells me that their careful curation of anecdotes was a deliberate attempt to deceive, and that they did not want me informing the people who were buying into their deception. Sometimes people get mad at me when I tell them that they've been lied to. Perhaps they feel like it's an attack on their intellect, or they're personally invested in the narrative, so an attack on it feels like an attack on them. That happens a lot when I'm critical of religion. Rather than attacking them, it's actually the exact opposite. I'm defending them. I'm trying to help stop them from being deceived by someone who is knowingly deceiving them. These people who are lying to you are wronging you. They are not your friends. Check out this video on TikTok that has almost 700,000 views. It's a compilation of people fainting. Now, people in the comments think it's because of the vaccine, and they have a lot of upvotes. It's a popular, common opinion. The video gets copied to Twitter with the statement, "I thank you, God, for giving me the senses not to take the so-called vaccine." The copy of that video is shared by an account with 50,000 followers who gets 1.1 million views on it. But check this out. 6 videos, 5 were filmed years before the pandemic. The other one was an unvaccinated person. If the truth is on your side, why lie? Speaking of vaccines, another way people use propaganda is by lying with statistics. This usually comes in the form of removing context. Since so many people have lied about the vaccines, that's what I'm going to use to demonstrate this. I realize the vaccines are very controversial and politicized. There's a lot of debate around the policies of both governments and businesses regarding the vaccines, mandates, and lockdowns, which is understandable. There's valid criticisms to be made of pharmaceutical companies. I understand that. This is not about any of that. This is not even technically about vaccine efficacy. Though, if the vaccines were harmful or ineffective, the last thing you would want to do is drown out all the legitimate criticisms with lies. No, this is only about how people can be deceived with the numbers they themselves use as evidence. For example, someone once presented me with this graph from an article that claims far more vaccinated people in England are dying than the unvaccinated. This claim has been repeated for many countries and by many outlets, including such prominent figures as Joe Rogan. It is actually true, but it removes essential context, thereby misleading people to believe something that is false. I mean, just look at this graph they made using official government data. It looks pretty bad for the vaccinated, right? 3,309 vaccinated died versus only 702 unvaccinated in this 4-week period. But you don't even have to post those numbers. You could simply post a headline that says 5 times more vaccinated people are dying than unvaccinated. And that would be enough. That would scare people, and it would be true. And it could cause you to assume that either the vaccines don't work or, even worse, that they are killing people. But, you see, at the time, 92% of the people in England were vaccinated. That's the key info that was left out. So here's what that info looks like when you add the context that was left out. Of those 51.5 million vaccinated people, 3,309 died in those 4 weeks, which is only 0.006% of the vaccinated population. But of the 4.5 million unvaccinated people, 702 died, which is indeed 5 times fewer, but there's 12 times fewer unvaccinated. So it's 0.02% of the unvaccinated population, which is a full order of magnitude higher rate of death than the vaccinated. What would the deaths look like if we reversed the number who got vaccinated with the number who did not and applied the same death rates? Well, if those 51.5 million people did not get vaccinated, then according to the unvaccinated death rate, instead of 3,309 of them dying, 10,304 of them would have died, 3 times the number of deaths. That's 7,000 more deaths if they did not get vaccinated, according to this info that was used to actually attack the vaccines. This is what 7,000 people look like. That's the difference. On the other hand, if only the unvaccinated group of 4.5 million got vaccinated, then according to the vaccinated death rate, instead of 702 of them dying, only 268 of them would have died. So in an alternate reality, where instead it was 92% of England that did not get vaccinated, the headline would not be that 5 times more vaccinated died than unvaccinated. It would be that 38 times more unvaccinated died than vaccinated. The official government data they cited, which they claimed proved that the vaccinated died at higher rates, even includes the per capita stats that clearly show that the unvaccinated died at higher rates. They used this data to make their claim, but in the document, that data comes after the data that refutes their claim. Why did they leave it out? Deliberate deception. That article, like all their other misleading articles, is still live, still circulating, and still deceiving people because hardly anyone is going to actually check their source or even know what to look for if they did. This is an example to demonstrate how accurate statistics can be abused. Here's another article from that same publication claiming that fully vaccinated people in England and Germany, which is most of you, are going to have AIDS by the end of January 2022. Well, it's a year later. If you're watching this from England or Germany, could you please post a comment and let us know if most of you have AIDS now? Since that's obviously ridiculous, a year later, they posted a new article about it. A retraction? A correction? An apology? No. You see, according to them, they were, in fact, right all along, and you do have AIDS. But the government covered it up, you see. People actually believe this stuff. Taking things out of context is one way people can be deceived. But another way is to do the exact opposite and add things that don't belong. This article about increased athlete cardiac arrests has circulated quite a bit. It claims that the years 2005 to 2006 averaged only 66 athlete deaths, and that number climbed to 1,148 in the last 2 years since COVID vaccine rollouts. 970 athlete deaths in 2022 alone. Sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? But the 66 athlete death average in those specific 2 years before COVID were chosen with very specific criteria. They were only people in the United States. Only people who compete and train regularly, excluding recreationally. Only people under age 40. And only people who had sudden cardiac death. The 970 athlete deaths of 2022, however, were mostly examples in which they removed the pertinent criteria. Instead of using just athletes in the United States like the pre-COVID data, they used people worldwide, 462 of which were not in the United States. They included 33 people who would not have been counted as athletes according to the pre-COVID data. Instead of age 40 or under, they were of any age, 333 of which were over 40. 43 of them didn't even die or have a cardiac arrest. 39 of them died of other causes, including car accidents, cancer, and suicide. 24 of them didn't have enough info. This is comparing apples to watermelons, and it is done deliberately to pump up those post-COVID numbers. These people who are deceiving you, they are wronging you. When you apply the pre-COVID criteria to the post-COVID data, the number of athlete deaths in 2022 actually declines to 36 cases. And even if we add all 24 cases that did not have enough info, there would be 60 cases at the most, according to this data, which is still less than the pre-COVID data. Another thing they leave out is that student athlete deaths have been increasing at a rate of 6% per year for decades. So it would make sense for it to be higher now. But not every death ended up in the news, and the news is what they relied upon for their data. If the truth is on your side, why lie? Check out this article, which was published before COVID. It claimed that a student athlete dies every 3 days, which is 122 deaths a year, actually double what this data says it is now, after COVID. That is in line with this study from 2012, which says the number is between 100 and 150. But it's tough to know if there's more because there's no dedicated reporting system, which is why the propagandists have to rely on the media for their data. If you used the technique of carefully curating anecdotes and listed the names of 122 student athletes who died recently, but excluded the fact that they died during a year before the pandemic, a lot of people would say, "My God, what is going on here? Obviously, something very sinister is happening." Then, every time they see a new anecdote of a young person dying, frequency illusion kicks in and they assume the cause. In 2017, around 150,000 people died per day worldwide. Nearly 20,000 per day were under 18 years old, which is about half of what it was in 1990. The days we're told to believe were so much better. Many of them died from heart issues. If you deceptively changed the year 2017 to 2023, or even worse, 1990 to 2023, and listed all the children who died on any given day of 2017 or 1990, or any year in between, and even limited it to the ones with heart issues, people would claim that it's obviously because of COVID vaccines, when really they're just looking at average yearly rates from a perspective of ignorance, because the first time they ever paid attention to it is when the vaccines came along. Now, if it turns out that the vaccines are increasing death rates, then you need the data to be compiled first. Using media stories and slapping together apples to oranges comparisons or lying with statistics could damage your credibility. So if it turns out that indeed the vaccines did cause some real harm, a lot of people are just going to dismiss it because of all the deceptive propaganda that preceded the real information. And of course, many others will see it as vindication of the lies they believed, which will just reinforce their susceptibility to future propaganda using the same deceptive methods. An example of the mainstream media excluding data deceptively is the idea that we will suffer catastrophic global cooling. Back in the 1970s, this type of sensational reporting was published by Time, Science Digest, the Los Angeles Times, Fortune, the Chicago Tribune, New York Magazine, the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, Popular Science, and National Geographic. The actual truth at that time, however, was the peer-reviewed scientific literature that accurately predicted global warming outnumbered papers that predicted global cooling by a factor of 600%. But because the media got into a sensationalist fear-mongering competition, they presented the exception as the rule and left out essential context, thereby misleading people. The effect that such irresponsible reporting has today is that rather than damage the credibility of the media, it unfairly damaged the credibility of the science. Because modern-day propaganda presents these old, misleading news stories as representative of the scientific consensus at that time, but they were never the consensus. This is an example of propaganda citing propaganda as evidence, falsehoods built upon falsehoods. They even went so far as to manufacture the propaganda themselves, like this modern Time magazine cover that was photoshopped to say it was published in 1977, complete with a headline that says the exact opposite of what it actually said. If the truth is on your side, why lie? The problem is that when fake photoshops like this spread online, far more people can see it and believe it than the number of people who learn that it's fake. I still see this fake Photoshop being used as evidence against climate change, even though it was debunked in 2013, a full 10 years ago. Yet people still believe it. This is how the truth loses. This is why freedom of speech does not guarantee that the facts and the best ideas will always win in the free and open marketplace of ideas, as is commonly believed. Since social media has surpassed the mainstream media with negative and divisive content, the mainstream media came full circle and now does reports based on social media. This is how fake outrage spreads. For example, a very small Twitter account posted a tweet that got 55 likes, calling the song Natural Woman harmful to trans people. Sky News actually did a report on that single tweet, saying that the woke deemed the song offensive, and thus they claimed that the trans rights movement is misogynistic. A much larger Twitter account picked up on the news report, did not link to the report, but instead just posted a screenshot of the misleading headline and said that the trans community deemed the song offensive. That tweet got 17,000 likes and 1.3 million views in less than 12 hours. If the media can base entire news stories on single anonymous tweets with low engagement, and then use that single tweet to smear an entire demographic, then literally anyone can create any outrage story they want, with any outrage headline they want, using fake accounts. But social media has also taken plenty of cues from the mainstream media. Besides, if it bleeds, it leads. Social media is flooded with claims that men are way weaker or more feminine than they were back when we were kids. But here's 18 examples of news stories from the year 2020 all the way back to the year 1886, claiming that men just aren't as manly as they used to be. Here's a phenomenon that's really strange and frustrating. Sometimes, accurate media reporting combined with good science can ironically combine to make people believe that the media was inaccurate and that the science was wrong. A couple of examples of this was the dangerous hole in our ozone layer and Y2K, which could have been a huge problem for a lot of systems that rely on computers, including nuclear power plants. The Montreal Protocol was a policy that was ratified by every country on Earth, which drastically reduced the use of chlorofluorocarbons in common products. That policy stabilized the ozone layer. Contrary to what the mockers believe, the hole still exists, but it is closing and is expected to fully close by the year 2060. It's estimated that this action saved about 2 million people per year from getting skin cancer. And computer programmers worked tirelessly for a decade before the turn of the century to solve the Y2K problem. My mother was one of them. I remember her working on it day and night. Of course, some people blew the problem out of proportion and made it seem world-ending, but that doesn't mean it was not a real problem. These were real solutions that real people worked on, deployed, and were successful. The media was correct in reporting that they were serious problems. The science was correct with its solutions. And the politicians were correct with their policies. So it all worked out. Everyone listened to each other. The system actually worked. When these problems did not manifest, however, because they were solved by people who took action, it turned into propaganda to discredit the media and the science, dismissing them as jokes and failed doomsday predictions. The very heroes who saved us from having to suffer from these problems not only went without thanks, but they were insulted and derided. Another form of propaganda uses carefully chosen people to stimulate bigotry. This involves such tactics known as cherry picking and nut picking. This form of propaganda is most typically found using the tactic of presenting the exceptions as the rule. For the side of the propagandist, they will use the very best examples of people who are on their side and present them as the typical person who is on their side. A highly accomplished doctor, scientist, genius, scholar, artist, philosopher, beautiful people, funny people, etc. That's cherry picking. For the side of their ideological enemy, they will pick the absolute worst examples and present them as the rule. A clip of someone having a mental breakdown, a bigot, a very unintelligent person, someone taken out of context, a criminal, someone with unusually extreme views, unattractive people, etc. And then that person is presented as the common example of their enemy. This is called nut picking. These examples are also often found among other carefully curated anecdotes. The essence of this particular form of propaganda can be distilled down to Chad versus Wojak memes. A particularly sinister form of nut picking is known as black propaganda, which you could describe as a form of controlled opposition. Black propaganda is when someone disguises themselves as their enemy or their enemy's group and then deliberately acts in objectionable ways in order to defame their enemy or their enemy's group. This usually comes in the form of creating anonymous social media accounts that claim to be part of that group and make posts in support of that group, be it political, religious, LGBT, etc. And then they deliberately act in objectionable ways, like advocating violence or claiming that pedophilia should be legal, etc. This actually gives their side something to be outraged about and gives them content that highlights the objectionable behavior to their audience. An entire outrage cycle can actually be generated by the very people who are on the same side as the outraged. If there's an outrage drought, someone can simply log into a fake account and manually generate the outrage for themselves. That is black propaganda. Many governments, including the United States, use social media in such ways. Like weeds, they root themselves into the cracks of social and political conflicts and then play upon them and try to make them worse, to destroy social cohesion and either disrupt the country from within or influence a country's political course. Or they will amplify the accounts of native citizens who are already doing so. But that's technically not black propaganda. It's using what they call useful idiots. It's not feasible to attack a powerful country from the outside, so people will seek to weaken it from within using its own citizenry, turning them against themselves like cancer. Because this propaganda plays upon our most primal impulses, we enthusiastically participate. Individuals also engage in this type of propaganda, like when Jesse Smollett faked a hate crime against himself, or when a Trump-supporting homeowner was caught vandalizing his own garage with Biden and BLM and then setting it on fire. Both of those events ended up getting reported in mainstream media and sowing discord. Sometimes people use black propaganda on an individual basis via identity theft. These accounts are not anonymous, but they also are not the people they claim to be. What if you named an account using your worst enemy's name and a picture of their face, and then used that account to send death threats to popular social media influencers who are either opportunistic or not too bright? That is a form of social media swatting. Consider this. I saw someone with 226,000 followers claim that they got a very vile message. Notice that the account was created the same month it sent the message. It had a full first and last name as their handle, and a picture of someone's face as their profile picture. And if it was them, then they were fully doxing themselves. The message it was claimed they sent was that they hope the person is brutally raped. Obviously, a horrific thing to send anybody. But someone who would send a message like that to a person with 226,000 followers from a brand new account using their own full name and a picture of their own face seemed very suspicious to me. As someone who has gotten hate mail and death threats for well over a decade now, I can tell you that they're always anonymous, at least in my experience. The person who received the hateful message immediately used it to smear her political rivals, which is the nut-picking aspect of the black propaganda, and then searched her name online and found out all about her. The recipient wanted to contact her school and employer to let them know about the terrible message. When she made the message public online, however, many people just took the initiative and contacted people in her life, which has very real consequences. An older Facebook account of the same name claimed that the Twitter account was not hers, which seemed pretty obvious to me. After the damage had been done, the Twitter account was closed, but the Facebook account remained. The Twitter account existed for only a few days, but it wreaked havoc on a real person's life and gave tens of thousands of people a false impression about their political enemies. All of that was accomplished by what was likely a single anonymous troll with a grudge and a gullible or opportunistic social media influencer. This is why I encourage you to recognize the flaws of logic in the way things are presented to you, the attempts to manipulate your emotions, and not to assume something is true just because it is accompanied by a headline, picture, graph, or video. We don't even know if that message was real. This version took me about 1 minute to create in Photoshop. Street interviews are another common form of propaganda. This usually takes the form of removing context, but it can also include black propaganda. A person could do 100 street interviews in America asking people a simple math question. 94 of them may have gotten it right. Then the street interviewer can simply cut those 94 people out of the final video and present the 6 who got it wrong and give the impression that everyone they interviewed got it wrong. What's the conclusion you're meant to draw? Well, that Americans are really dumb, of course. Another way to employ black propaganda here is to interview actors who deliberately answer questions in whatever way they want them to answer in order to promote whatever lie they're trying to sell. There are other ways to selectively edit video or falsely combine pictures and captions that are very common. Propaganda that relies on editing video is all about removing context. Someone may seem to be acting unreasonably or acting as the aggressor, when in actuality they're just defending themselves, but the part of the video in which they are attacked is cut out. Or someone may be quoting someone else, yet the video will be selectively edited to make it look like they are not quoting someone else, but instead expressing their own ideas or opinions. Another way to mislead with video is to simply swap out the audio. You can add cheers or boos where they don't exist, or statements that were never uttered, etc. Pictures are easy to Photoshop, and pictures are also often incorrectly captioned. Here's a picture of a mass wedding in Gaza that has spread far and wide as the icon for child marriage. The children in this picture are family members, not the brides. Yet they are represented in articles as brides, represented in memes as brides to smear political opponents. And even though elsewhere in this same procession you can see Palestinian flags, here they are presented as brides in Iraq, and here they are presented as brides in South Africa. Most people will not investigate this. They will see the picture and the caption and assume that it is correct. If a correction is made, most people will never see it. Corrections do not appeal to our primal human nature. Fear, anger, and danger appeals to our primal human nature. That is what will spread. That is what will be remembered. People will be more apt to believe things that align with their preconceived notions. They don't suspect the things they expect to see or even want to see to actually be lies, but oftentimes they are. That's why, before you decide to post your opinions on anything, you should at least try to investigate whether or not the claim is true first. A lot of people share articles without even reading them. They just look at the headline and assume what the article says. But the problem is, headlines are often deliberately misleading and purposefully provocative. Sometimes the article can even say the exact opposite of what the headline does. I can't tell you how many times someone sent me an article to prove their point, but when I read the article, it turns out to completely disagree with their point. Most of all, beware of screenshots of headlines. Now, this can mean that the person simply doesn't want you to give the article traffic, but it could also mean that they just want you to believe the headline without reading the article and finding out that it either justifies the headline or is about something completely different. And it could even be an altered headline. People see it, believe it, post about it, and then others see those posts, believe them, and post about it, and the lie spreads like fire. For instance, this headline is fake, yet it's spread to hundreds of thousands of people. Here's the real headline. Let's see how long it takes me in real time to make a website display a fake headline. About 26 seconds. There are many more methods people use to deceive you, and perhaps I'll get into those into the future, but for now, I'll leave you with this. Technology seems to be advancing at a faster rate than to which human beings evolved to be able to responsibly adjust and acclimate. The modern world has developed all kinds of innovative ways to deceive you. It will be very difficult for us to keep up with that. Bear in mind that more advanced AI and deepfakes are coming. It's getting closer to the point where average people can make very convincing fake videos of other people. And there's programs that will recreate your voice from a few samples. So a malicious actor can say anything in your voice, and in the near future, it will be possible to convincingly make it look like you did things and said things on video that you neither did nor said. AI is getting very good at being able to respond to what you say as if it's a real person. What takes us a lifetime to master can take an AI mere minutes. Imagine an internet filled with AI that has pre-programmed opinions deployed to shape narratives, fake popularity, trends, and influence using machine learning that has determined the most effective methods of persuasion. Imagine the kind of extremist views that could become mainstream. It's hard enough to know what is true now, and I fear that it will only become more difficult in the years ahead. So please keep these things in mind, the different ways people can mislead you now. Stay skeptical and don't assume. If the claim is important enough or significant enough, investigate it thoroughly, using many sources, neutral ones if possible, before you decide it's true or false. Finally, of course, I said monetization is a motivation and can be a problem, but I hope everyone here can see that I'm relying on my arguments and not the tactics I've presented in this video. And of course, there are other good content creators who do not indulge in misleading tactics as well. I'm sure that if I engaged in such tactics, I could become much more popular and bring in much more revenue. But I actively choose not to do it. And because of that, I will make less money and I will be heard by fewer people. It's frustrating, but it also makes me feel very grateful for those of you who are here and those of you who do contribute. So thank you to my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube members and those of you who engage with and share my work. I really appreciate you and I thank you. All the relevant sources for this video can be found in the description box below. Take care, everybody.